Sounds good. So, some quick little things I wanted to touch up on. Of course, since they're getting so many complaints over on the Protoss forum in particular, is that 111 push out of Terran. I know you and I did some practice games together, but I don't think I've played enough recently to do enough justice to that to say what those experimentations went down for. So, after we had those little sessions of playing together, and after you've seen more footage on it, possibly in the GSL or wherever, any new things to add that we haven't really covered? Or I guess go ahead and start us off on the discussion. We'll just go wherever it takes us.
No, the 111 build in the all-in version that most people are complaining about, it is you have to treat it like any other all-in. But the thing that differentiate I can't talk. The thing that makes it different from other all-ins is that there's more waves than one, and that's kind of what like the big uproar is kind of caused after the ESL. Is that what it was called?
Um, I think it was. It's been around for a little while. It's been in GSL for a while, but most recently in IEM, Puma busted it out on MC twice, and MC lost to it both
That's right.
times.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that was the instance I was talking about. A lot of the uproar I saw was after those games, and a lot of people need to realize that that push is deadly because the second wave is what usually will kill you. Like that first wave, you can deal with exactly like MC did. He lost his Nexus, which he might have been able to save, but you can hold it off with a certain mixture of units. But you have to keep in mind is there's going to be another wave coming, so you have to properly prepare for that wave. And I think that's what a lot of people get caught up on. They think that, I held the all-in, I win. It's not the case. You got to deal with the rest of the all-in. It's coming. It's basically kind of a process, like a delayed all-in, I guess you could say. But there's plenty of ways to stop it.
I think the way people need to start thinking about this all in is that you need to kill Marines. If you don't kill Marines, and if you don't deal with whatever else is out there, like obviously you have to kill the Banshees or deal with point defense drones or kill tanks or whatever, but if you just focus on killing tanks and you just focus on killing those Banshees, there's still tons of Marines there. And Marines, if they get into a huge enough group, they're just so hard to stop, especially in
Well,
that early stage of the game. So I think the ultimate answer to this is going to be you have to put out something that's going to specifically kill Marines really fast and remove damage from the table before those tanks get 3, 4, and 5 volleys off.
well, it's also about where you engage it, and we can go into that in depth later on. But like Sidewinder said, the tanks and the Banshees and the Raven are all there to force a Protoss to engage. And once you've engaged, it's the Marines that are actually doing the damage. It's not the tanks and it's not the Banshees. Those are just support units to the Marines. So, like, the Marines act as that meat shield, but they also do the majority, vast majority even, of the damage.
Yeah, so I think what we're going to start seeing surfacing in the next couple of days, weeks, whatever. I've actually already seen one surface. Is a quick expansion into a fast Templar tech transition. Because if you can somehow manage to get Storm out against that and Storm on those Marines, it's going to make it so much easier to engage later, especially if you can Storm before the tanks have even sieged. Like if you can get an engagement in the middle of the map against unsieged tanks and land a couple of Storms on those Marines, there's the chances of you holding that off later are so much higher than if you just went with, I don't know, 6 gateways and Phoenix and I don't know, whatever else. We'll see what happens. So I think that's the ultimate where this is going to wind up, is just focusing on killing Marines and then killing everything else later because it's going to be a lot easier to clean up.
Well, the way the build works, the way the timings work out, is you cannot continually produce off of all of those buildings because you're so limited by your gas. Like, you can't reinforce with those tanks and those Banshees as quickly, but because Marines are so cheap and you can just produce them 4 at a time in that build, that's really what kills you. So even killing the Marines, like if you can kill off the first wave, you are in a very good position, but you have to keep that advantage. And the way you keep that advantage, I think, is to tech to something like Templar or Colossus. I don't think you need either of those to hold off the first push. In fact, I know for a fact that you don't. But it's a lot to do with where you engage and the how you transition out of the first part of the all-in. Like, even if he kills your Nexus, you cannot try to retake that Nexus. He's going to be so broke in his main, he's not going to be able to expand, because if he expands, you can immediately counterattack and kill him. So if you just stay on that one base, if you lose your expo, which you shouldn't, but if you lose your expo, you should stay on that one base and tech up to those higher tier units to deal with the Marines, because if you can hold off that second wave, the game is pretty much yours.
Well, and it depends on when you're talking about waves because there's so many different variations you can have within there. Everybody runs it differently. Like there's not one specific build, like the supply drop Marine SCV all in or something that's very specific. Everybody pushes out at slightly different times. So it kind of depends on what time you're talking about in
Well,
terms
the
of being
thing
able to pull off the
is,
first wave and what you might have out for it.
that is true, but in regards to the second wave, there is a constant in that build regardless of the units you choose to produce, and it's the Marines. The Marines will be produced 4 at a time. And if you can deal with the Marines in an efficient enough manner after the first wave is over, then you can kill it. But you have no way of knowing when the Terran is going to push out. You can know that the build is coming, and there's a lot of little keys you can spot there to tell you that that's the build you're going up against, but you can't know exactly when they can push out. Like, I can push out with that build at 9 minutes and 30 seconds. But there's also variations where you push out more around 12 minutes. So there's a lot of different things you can do with it. And it's up to the Terran to decide when they want to move out.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different factors that can go into it, but ultimately, at least from my perspective of seeing it so many times, and considering there's so many variations, they all include Marines. If you can kill the Marines, especially before they get to your base, you put yourself in a very good position to win the rest of the battles after that. And of course, if you can engage in the middle of the map, that also helps. Basically, if you can kill Marines before tanks can siege, or before you take really any army damage, at least hull damage, then you're in a fantastic position. So maybe that'll help change the thinking of people trying to approach this build in terms of what buildings do I put down at what time in order to beat it, as opposed
Oh,
to just what do I need to eventually get out in order to hold it off.
I actually did want to talk about a version of the 1-1-1 that I think it was Slayers Rion did against, I think it was Tester? Is that his name now? He
Was
changes his name so often, but
was it
it was
really
against,
recent, like last couple of days?
yeah, it was pretty recent. But Tester actually had brilliant Stalker micro that thinned out the push so much. And just from seeing that, that just tells me that there's so much potential in just moving out early with a couple of Stalkers and just picking off Marines, like, while the push is coming towards you. Because the tanks aren't going to be in range of those Stalkers, and you can just keep picking away at the Marines the entire way they're coming to your base. But in that game, if you go do watch it, Tester dies because once he's decided he's killed off enough Marines, he makes an expansion.
Yeah.
And I think that if he hadn't made that expansion, he would have easily won the game. Easily.
Yeah, I think so too. So ultimately the answer is going to be kill Marines, whether it's picking them off as you go or storming them all down or Colossus or whatever. But yeah, I totally agree. It's got to be progressive. It can't just be sit in your base and wait for them to come siege up in your face and then hope
Well,
you don't die.
the problem with that is a lot of people will wait until the Terran is in the perfect position. See, like, a lot of Protoss deal with Marine pressure through force fields. You know, you want to force field the Marines off into sectors. The siege tanks negate that advantage because the siege tanks force you to engage into the Marines, and the siege tanks will outrange anything you can throw at the Terran. So once the Terran's all balled up in a choke with tanks, there's really no good way to engage that, and no real unit composition is going to deal with that. You have to think more tactically.
Yeah. And I think a couple of concepts that I don't think a lot of Protoss players really understand, at least down in the leagues below, I'd even say below Masters, is the concept of both positioning and map control. They're used to making the army at certain times and then pushing out when they have a big scary army that they can just move into. But in terms of actual map control and in terms of positioning, I don't think that Protoss players really know enough about that yet to start being able to deflect these pushes. Because it's really easy to make units and just sit them at your natural and wait for something to come up and fight you and just fight at your natural, as opposed to stowing your army, near their base or around the map or whatever. So
I've had that happen to me so many times on the ladder, even in the Masters division, even the top Masters will make that mistake constantly.
yeah,
Like, I had a game just the other day where I was dropping a Protoss, he got frustrated, he attacked into my concave and died. And the entire reason he lost was he chose to attack where I was strongest and he was weakest. So Protoss really do need to learn to do that. And the way I like to phrase it, especially to lower league players, is a lot of times like platinum and up is generally my cutoff. Like that's not true for everybody. I'm not trying to say that, people below platinum don't know this, but from my experience, platinum and up know what they need to do, they don't know how to do it. Like they know the unit composition they need to get, they know the basic build order they need to execute, they don't know why that build order works, and they don't know how to engage with the units they've made, and they don't know why they made the units they made. So I think that once people start to understand that, they'll do a lot better against Terran, especially against that push.
Yeah, and it's just funny because I felt like Protoss has always been kind of the in-between race between the super offensive Zerg and super defensive Terran. And Terrans all know about positioning. They all know about, especially in Terran versus Terran, positioning is almost everything.
It is everything.
And in Zerg, map control is often almost everything. So Protoss players, they don't really have a specialty that isn't defined by, units fighting each other. So they don't really understand the concepts of map control or the concepts of positioning quite yet, but I think once they start to understand positioning in particular, and the fact that you can just simply moving an army somewhere that you want them to be can be a huge advantage, because then your subsequent engagement in combination with force fields can be really devastating. Once they start grasping onto that concept a little more, I think they'll start to solve these pushes and even come up with more tactics that other races will be like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do against this?
Mm-hmm.
So,
You actually brought up a really good point about the mirror matchups. I hadn't thought about that, but Protoss vs. Protoss is often about who has the better micro or who executes their build order better.
yeah.
And in Terran vs. Terran, that is absolutely not the case. You can completely screw over your build order, but if you have good map presence and good map positioning and, all that good stuff, you will win the game, regardless of what the other person does. You have to know that if I hold this position, it allows me to take these expansions and push up this flank. So you know how to position your army, and that TVT teaches you how to do that. It's not that Terran players have some kind of secret weapon that they just know how to do this from, birth or whatever, and Zerg, they also know about map control because of speed links and their mirror matchups. So I think the other races' mirror matchups actually teach them those concepts where the Protoss mirror doesn't teach them that.
It doesn't teach them either one. I mean, having map control in Protoss versus Protoss is such a foreign concept. And map control can be defined by so many different things. It basically means that your opponent can't afford to move out of their base, otherwise they're going to die to something or get way behind from something. In a nutshell, I mean, it can encompass so many different things, but there's no point in Protoss versus Protoss where you're like, I need to really start contesting for map control right now, because you can warp in anywhere. Most games in Protoss versus Protoss end on one base anyway. Positioning doesn't really matter outside of who has control of the ramp. So, I mean, it's just a mirror matchup that's not conducive to teach Protoss players skills in which they will need to apply in other situations or other matchups.
I completely agree. I'm so glad you brought that up. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, so anyway, I think we've gone over the 111 enough for right now. If it continues to be a problem, we'll bring it up next week.